Thank you for that very wonderful introduction, which I wrote. Okay. But by the way, the title of the talk was changed. I don't know if Najib will allow that, but my talk this afternoon will be on applications of vocational training to universal design and learning. Then I realized I had a lot more to say about vocational training. So I used the same title, but I'm not really going to talk about universal design and learning. I'm just going to talk about how good vocational training is. So I changed the title to reflect that. And this afternoon, as I said, I'll speak about applications to UDL. So I want to start, in other words, I'm going to talk about vocational training, but you'll ask, why should we talk about it? So I'm starting with a very simple motivating example. And this is the Amit State Technological High School in Jerusalem. In Israel, the high schools are run by networks. So there are various networks. Amit is the name of one of the networks. They run the religious network. They're officially recognized by the government. And they've done a lot of experimentation with new pedagogies and various types of delivery of education. So in this school, the children are poor and vulnerable. It's one of their tenets that at least 70% of the children should come from the periphery, because these schools were designed for people who are not affluent, who are in the lower socioeconomic strata. These students have not met traditional academic requirements, which is a polite way of stating they failed every place else. They have undiagnosed learning disabilities, they have behavioral problems, and they're known to welfare authorities. That simply means they're on the streets and drugs, but it sounds much better if you put it this way. So you're dealing with a population that's troubled, and one of the things this charity specializes in is taking these children and making them totally productive adults. So I want to discuss what this particular school does. First of all, it wants to give them the profession and skills to turn their lives around. They have a program that they work with social workers and psychologists, and they try and develop a personal relationship with their students. That's a very important part. They want to create an environment of trust and responsibility. One of the main things, and this is what I'm getting into in vocational training, they went away from the traditional curriculum. These students are not good in math. They're not good in reading English. So if you teach them English, they fail, and then they get depressed, and they go out in the streets. So one of the ideas here is give them something they can do. So the things there, some of them have nothing to do with math and English, like hairstyling and wood cutting, electric and auto. And basically, by concentrating on a curriculum where they can learn something specific and they're staying away from the skills they don't have, these students succeed. And you wouldn't recognize them when they grow up that they came from such poor backgrounds. Their flagship course is Auto Tech Tools for Success, which deals with the latest in cars and everything else. I'll just mention the results. So in Israel, one of the ways they measure the success of a high school is what % go on to serve in the army. There it's 95%. Elsewhere in Israel, it's much lower, and the matriculation rate is much lower. They've recently entered into a partnership with the IDF, and the idea is they come in 10th grade, they come to school in uniform, and when they graduate, they join the Technological and Logistics Corps. The IDF is the Israeli Defense Force, if you don't recognize the acronym. And basically, so these students who weren't that good in anything, they become here, and this is the unit responsible for advanced weaponry. So this is the example I wanted to give. It's an example of people who are really doing poorly, and the school turned them around. And you look at it, and one of their basic ideas, of course, they had help, but their basic ideas changed the curriculum. So basically, they turned their lives around by doing this, and the attributes I get from this is recidivism reduction. So they don't go back onto the streets. Now, everyone would like a program where you take someone from the streets, they don't return there. And they're doing this by vocational focusing. They're saying, we'll give you vocational skills that you can use. Their quality of life is certainly higher. And one argument, whenever you see great programs like this, is, well, I wish I could do it. We don't have funding. Well, the point here is it costs less to change the curriculum than it does to rehabilitate people, and we'll see this all along. So cost is not a problem here. The only problem is people don't know this works, so that's why I'm lecturing about it. The second attribute is it had the support of the state. We'll get into that later. First of all, for example, in America, you couldn't design a curriculum where you didn't need to know reading and English. So it's very important that the state, in terms of its requirements for graduation, recognize it. Also, you saw here they partnered with the IDF. Now, the Israeli Defense Force doesn't have to partner with people with lower socioeconomic attributes, but they're getting a great deal out of it. They're getting some very good technicians. The third thing you see here is that a vocational approach, teaching them a job, is much better than psychology. They have psychological help, they're in social workers, but the point is, they didn't send them to a psychologist. Why are you on the streets? Let's give you a drug that will counteract the addiction. They didn't do any of this. They just changed the curriculum, and they all got better. So it suggests a totally different approach to psychology. So I put these in orange. These are the three things I want to deal with today. I wish I could spend all morning on it. Maybe you would wish that also, but I'm just going to spend a little bit on each of these. So let's deal with recidivism reduction, and that's why, as I said, I changed the title. I found that vocational training is used to reduce return or recidivism in three areas: substance abuse, mental illness, particularly schizophrenia, and prison. So there are well-defined vocational programs in the United States, for example, in the Netherlands and other places where this is used, and it's been very successful. And again, in all cases, quality of life improves, and it's cost-effective. So let's deal with substance abuse first. It's effective against relapse. There are some states, it's not universal, but there are some states that have tried this, and that against relapse, that means of the occurrence of relapse, which means going back to the substance abuse, or the severity of relapse. Like in the Amit case, it wasn't just vocational, because there are lots of problems that have to be dealt with. So you have some traditional substance abuse treatment, but you couple it with vocational training. I just list some of the problems. If I went to an employer and said, would you like to hire someone who is on substance abuse? Well, here are the problems. They have, the two there stands for twice as much. They have twice as many absences. They have 3 times as many latenesses. They have more, people on substance use, they use more sick days. Worker compensation forms are filed 5 times as frequently. They're more prone to accidents. You don't want them stealing your company property, and they only work at 75% capacity. So they need some help, but the point is, once the help is given and they have the vocational training, it works. And there are a variety of trainings. The literature is clear it works. It's just not clear which one works. There's vocational training. There's preparatory vocational training. There's training for getting competitive jobs. They don't just teach them vocational training, they have to teach them interview skills, return to society, and a few other things. But the point is, this is all focused around vocational programs. Later on, I'll mention some of the states that have done this, and again, if I had time, I'd go into what each state is doing and the types of programs, but they all have this in common, that they are coupling substance abuse treatment with vocational treatment. That's all I could say on this in the time I have allotted. Mental illness. Again, people on mental illness, well, you're mentally ill, you go to a psychiatrist, you get a certain drug. If that doesn't work, you try another drug, and that's the way you cure people, and then you don't always cure people and things like that. So this was most of the papers I read about schizophrenia, but there are a variety of programs. First of all, they all want jobs. But they need help, vocational preparation, competitive job placements. There are a few programs, and again, it's not clear which one works the best, but it's clear they work. So the point is, they take these schizophrenics, they prepare them for jobs, they teach them necessary skills, and they go back. The benefits are cost. It costs less to have a program of curriculum for vocational treatment than it does to take back people who have relapses in their mental illness and cure them. I saw 10,000 euros. I saw this. I saw all types of computations. There was so much variety there, I didn't put them in here. But the cost savings is significant. So the reason you're not going to do this is not because it'll cost. It's savings. The benefits in mental health services, so these people who are sick, I mean, they have schizophrenia, it could be a genetic disease, they're working there. The point is the need for mental health services goes down dramatically. This is acting as a cure. And another point they make is they keep their jobs. That's one of the metrics they use in the experiments. How long have they kept their jobs? How much are they earning? They're doing quite well. The other point I wanted to make, it's independent of geography. There are experiments. There are a lot of experiments here, but there are experiments in Norway. The idea is the level of income there, it's uniform and it's high level. And you might not think that people like that want schizophrenics in their office, but it's worked there also. There are experiments all over. So again, vocational training seems to have worked here. Prison inmates. Again, there are programs where you put a person in prison, you spank him and throw him outside, they'll probably return. They're less likely to return. They stay employed and they keep their wages. So this is a vocational program in the prisons. There are a variety of states and programs. I'm going to mention things later, but I'll just mention the 5 charter school in San Francisco, Los Angeles area. They have 20 different vocational programs. Financial literacy, I put the list there, bike repair, construction, masonry, print shop, pet grooming. It's like the experiment that was done by Amit, and these things are very helpful. Sometimes they're geared to teenagers and other things. So just to review, I went through recidivism, getting people off the streets and keeping there for both people on substance abuse, mental illness, and prison inmates. Now I'll mention support of the state. That was an attribute, maybe it wasn't that obvious, but I'll mention how Israel does it, America does it, and the states do it. So Israel's second, I'll put it first. So first of all, they have broad matriculation requirements. In America, and I'll talk about that this afternoon, so they speak that everyone should have access to learning. That's really wonderful. But then what is the access they should have to learning? Well, they have to learn reading and arithmetic and math. Maybe they're not good in reading and math. So what have you accomplished? You said, I'll teach you math in 15 ways, but they're still not good in it. And the examples I read are like that. The point here is in Israel, to graduate high school, you need matriculation diplomas. It's like a college degree here. It says what you're good at and what you can get a job in the job market. It also determines whether you go to the Army. So there are about 15, 20 areas where you can get matriculation requirements. Now, I myself never understood this, but I give to this charity, so we have people who come in. I was speaking to her. She said there are math and English exams, and you can get between a 1 and 5. And she said if you want to go to college, for example, you need a 4 or 5. And everyone has to take them, but if your concentration is on music, and I've spoken to students from this charity, I asked them if they take math. They said, I'm in music. What do I need math for? They have to score only a 3 on math, which in America might be their problem, that they're scoring only a 3. Here's all they need. They need a minimum competency and other things. So one of the things I'm going to argue this afternoon is that if we changed our curriculum requirements, we'd have less problems. We're creating our problems and then trying to solve them. The other thing I want to point out here is the Army didn't have to get involved in helping these people, but they want to. They're getting very good technicians. The students work in an outstanding manner. You wouldn't recognize the before or after. If I showed you this person who's doing advanced weaponry, you might be shocked that they were bored, lack self-esteem, which is the way a lot of students in Amit are. As I said, 70% are on the periphery in the lower socioeconomic strata. And so the Army's involved in this. The point is you can't just create a program. It has to have the approval of the state. Let me go back to America. And again, I wanted to speak about this, but there was so much. All I can do is tell you this. This is some legislative history. These are public laws passed by Congress. Some of them deal with disabilities. Some of them deal with substance abuse. Some of them deal with people in the VA. I'll just mention them. The American with Disabilities Act, 1990, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996, the Contract with America Advancement Act of 1996, the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997, and all these things, they give money, they give grants, they encourage programs, and they'll give you money if you're involved with them. Some of the things on the bottom deal with, I think, with the VA, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which was very old. That was renewed in 1998, the Workforce Investment Act of 1998, and just recently, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIA, of 2015. So you can see from here one thing. I mean, you hear a lot in the news about what Congress is involved in. They are involved in this. You never hear about this because it works and it's nice, but there are always controversial things like healthcare that people get involved in. But this works. It saves money. The problem with healthcare is not that it's not good. It's that you're spending too much for what you want. Here, you have cost savings and results. And as I said, what happens here, typically the Act encourages programs and other things, and it gives grants. I mentioned Israel, the states. So first of all, the Veterans Administration, there's a partnership with them. I think one of the acts gives them 50% on grants. And these are some of the states: Oregon, Minnesota, Colorado, Florida, California, Kansas, Missouri. These states have programs. Some of them are for substance abuse. Some of them are for prison inmates. Some of them are for charter schools. They'll go in, they'll create the program, they'll get some funding, and as I said, the nice thing about them is they all work. I can't say uniformly that they cut recidivism, but they cut relapses by 100%. Sometimes it's by a factor of 30, sometimes it's by a factor of a half, sometimes it's by a factor of 2. And when I write the final paper, I'll have to worry about this, but the point is these all work. Everyone's happy about it. So that was the second thing I wanted to mention about the Amit motivating example. You have the support of the state, and the first thing was the reduction of relapse. Now I wanted to speak to you about the vocational approach and the psychological approach. What's being said here that you might not understand it is that they're sort of saying the heck with psychology. If you teach people a profession, you don't need psychology and all these drugs and everything else. So I just wanted to mention again 3 areas: scientific research, Jewish versus Christian charity laws, and the Holland psychology, as well as biblical sacrifices. So this is a little bit non-standard, but I hope you enjoy it. All the scientific research which reports, oh, this worked for schizophrenics, this works for substance abuse. So these are quotations. It benefits people to be employed and making a contribution to society. It promotes citizenship as a result of a work role, and I quoted some papers here. The unemployed, by contrast, have increased mental illness, increased mental distress, reduced self-esteem, and increased psychosomatic symptoms. And of course, there is a higher suicide rate among unemployed than employed. So however bad your job is, it'd be a lot worse if you had nothing to complain about. But this is what you find in the literature. I thought I'd mention the charity laws. Sometimes people give me arguments. I know a lot about Jewish philosophy. Sometimes I get Christian philosophy a little wrong, so anyone who wants to can correct me here. But my understanding is in Christianity, charity is a virtue because you negate your own ego. There's the concept of original sin in Christianity, and what you want to do is you want to negate the tendency to hoard everything for yourself. In Judaism, charity is an imitation of God. You create ex nihilo. So there's a very interesting example that will illustrate this. Suppose I have a person and he wants to start a job. I can give him a loan or I can give him charity. Which is better? They're both good. Both religions will say both good, but which is better? So it's interesting. Judaism says the loan's superior, and Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher, is known for a lot of things. He had a ladder of 8 rungs for charity. And if you ask little school children, a lot of them will know about the 8 rungs. And just to illustrate it, on the lowest rung is when you give something to someone, but don't smile at them. And I'm talking about the Jewish law books, they're very critical. Like someone comes and says, oh, it's you again, you haven't gotten a job here, here's a $20 bill. They say, this is not a high level of charity because you've negated everything you've done by giving to him. But the highest level of charity is a loan. Why? Because I'm giving this person a loan of $10,000, he's starting a job, he's going to give me my $10,000 back. I haven't lost anything. There's been no destruction of wealth, but he now has a business. He's created wealth. So to use the language of the Bible, I've created ex nihilo, which can be done in the economic sphere. It can't be done in the physical sphere. I've participated with God in the creation act. And that's why charity is such a high thing. As far as I understand, Christianity would love it if you gave a person a loan or charity, but charity is superior because if you give a person a loan, you're saying, I want my money back. And that's bad, that's ego. Whereas it's better to negate the ego. But either way, I just wanted to point out here the idea of creation without loss, which is one of the attributes of vocational psychology. So this is the last slide. Oh, I'm doing well. Most people have not heard of Holland. It's the most widely accepted vocational theory, and I'll give you a summary of his theory in a second. What it basically says is not only do people have personalities, but jobs have personalities. So the United States, the Department of Agriculture, has classified 13 or 15,000 jobs by their vocational personality. And what Holland basically said is, have you ever noticed that some people stay in the job, some people leave it? Well, if your personality and the job's personality are the same, you're more likely to stay, you're more likely to be happy, you're more likely to have satisfaction of these things, whereas if they're the opposite, it'll go away. So I'm going to summarize this theory on the bottom, and I wrote a paper once, I'm just throwing this in for entertainment. It turns out in biblical sacrifices, everyone knows that biblical sacrifices, as they say, they just didn't work out. There was a lot of corruption, the priests took everything for themselves, and all the prophets say, what do I need? I'm God, I don't need your sacrifices. Why don't you behave nicely? So you come away from the Bible with the attitude is sacrifices are bad. Well, they were used in a bad way, but I asked the obvious question, what was the intent when the biblical laws were created? And it turns out there are 6 objects that can be offered as sacrifices. They're on the bottom row there: sheep, rams, oxen, birds, plants, and incense. It turns out those 6 things correspond to the Holland categorization. So I'll just mention that. And what I conjectured in the article was that the original intent was that the priests should function as vocational counselors. So if, for example, a woman who gives birth, she brings a sacrifice because her way of approaching life, her vocational personality has to change now that she has a child. So these are the 6 theories. The mnemonic is reistic. I didn't put them in the traditional order. Social means like this: you have a job, you're in human resources, you like to help other people get jobs. There are people like that. They don't produce objects, they don't produce services. Well, they do produce services. They want to deal with other people and make them happy. Psychologists are another example. Then there's enterprising. I don't know where the name came from, but those are people who like to be managers. They like to run things. They think they're very good at it. Maybe they are very good at it, and other things. You'll notice how social corresponds to sheep. I mean, sheep are social animals. Enterprising corresponds to ram. Then there are people who are artistic. They like to produce music. They like to produce art. They like self-expression, and of all the sacrifices, there are the perfume sacrifices, the incense. Then there is the conventional. Now, I wrote one paper on this, and I disagreed with the way they formulate this, because the conventional corresponds to the ox or the bull, and the point is you use those to thresh fields. And the point there is on productivity. So I'll give you an example. The difference between a research scientist and a secretary. A secretary might say, I was given 20 letters to type this week, I got all of them done. I was given 15 tasks to do this week, I got all of them done. She measures her satisfaction and success by how much she produces. A research scientist does not measure their success on what they produce. They said, I was attacking this problem all week. It could be a medical problem, it could be a mathematical problem, it could be a software problem. I made 7 attempts and got nowhere, but the person's still happy because they're doing research. So it's a different type of world. There's something called realistic. In the sacrifices, it's not that obvious. The point is, instead of animal sacrifices, there are plant sacrifices. They deal with the real world. And these are people, maybe they like, for example, some people just love to deal with cars. Those are inanimate objects. What about people? They're not that into people. They're into cars. Or they're into plumbing. They're into things that they enjoy. The last thing is the hardest category, so I put it at the end, and that's the scientific category. Holland actually put science, dissidents, and rebellious teenagers all in the same area. So that helps, once you understand it, it can shed light on it. He basically said that scientists consist of people who think out of the box. They don't have a territory, which is like birds. They're not content with where they are. They want to go someplace else, and that's also what political dissidents are doing, and that's also what rebellious teenagers are doing. So there are some people who want to get paid for being, I don't want to say for being obnoxious, for being different, for thinking of new things, who are not happy with the content. So the point is, this is a very powerful theory. I see I have some time, 2 minutes, so I'll just mention it's very easy to assess someone on this. And when I talk this afternoon, I'm going to say it should be done in elementary school because it's an important characteristic. First of all, you have self-assessment. You can ask a person, how would you like to work? Do you want to deal with people? Do you want to manage people? Do you want to deal with real things? Most people have a well-defined thing. There are also these question tests which tell your preferences and other things. And to make a long story short, there are 6 categories, but they take the top 3 areas. So, for example, a profession, I'm a teacher, for example, so I deal with people. I also lead them, so they're social and enterprising, and I'm a bit of a scientist. And those are the 3 areas I deal with. I would have the letters SES. That would classify them, and there's a certain order. I would do well in jobs that are SES. And I would do poorly in jobs. I would not be very happy if I was writing music or fixing cars or things like that. So let me just conclude. I didn't have a conclusion slide. What I wanted to show today is that the vocational approach works. It's an alternate to psychology. It works not only in the teaching situation. It works in prisons, it works with substance abuse, it works with mental health. It especially works when the state helps with it in some way. It is cost effective, so the reason we're not doing it is not because of lack of money. So with that I conclude, and I want to thank you.